Hello again, everyone. I'm Tom Nagorski, managing editor at the Cipher Brief. Good to have you with us here for a conversation about Donald Trump's plans for Gaza, or his stated plans. Full disclosure, we had booked this interview planning to talk about, in a more traditional way perhaps, the meeting that Mr. Trump had with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday. Now, of course, we'll just get right to what were, I think, by any stretch, a stunning set of statements that the president made about Gaza. We're joined by Ambassador Gary Grappo, Cipher Brief expert, former ambassador to Oman, who also served in Saudi Arabia and Iraq. And Ambassador Grappo, there are many ways we can take this, but I'll just maybe start with a couple of fundamental things from those statements that I referenced that the president made sitting alongside Prime Minister Netanyahu. First, that the United States should, his words, take a long-term ownership position in Gaza, unquote, to help rebuild the territory, and that the nearly 2 million people who live there would go someplace else. And when pressed on that, he said, permanently. Just stop there and get your initial reaction to those statements.
Well, like so many other people, Tom, and by the way, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. Like so many other observers of the Middle East and folks who have worked there, I've run out of adjectives to explain my reaction to the president's remarks. I was just simply in a state of shock that an American president could make a statement like that when every president before him has drawn a very, very firm line about the United States inserting itself sort of physically, militarily, and given the president's remarks, into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I cannot believe that there are many people on Capitol Hill who will be very enthused over these remarks, that the United States is going to choose to insert itself in yet another Middle East conflict. The war, of course, in Gaza is not over, although thankfully there is a ceasefire in place. Hostages are being returned. Gazans are able to return, albeit to not much, of their homes, at least in northern Gaza. And some real efforts now need to be made with regard to the terms for the second stage of this ceasefire. And yet the president took off on this bizarre tangent, which is, to me, just it's not, I can't really reconcile it. The United States taking over, dispossessing more than 2 million Gazans from their homes, to the extent that they still remain in Gaza, and then sending them off to other countries in the Middle East, presumably Egypt and Jordan, whose leaders have firmly rejected any notion of expelling the Palestinians from Gaza, much less accepting them in their own countries. Mr. Trump spoke about this plan of his in terms he's probably familiar with: a real estate deal. Gaza is not a real estate deal, and he has certainly made his career on some pretty successful and then a few less successful deals in the Middle East or in this country. But taking on something like Gaza, which has so many other issues attached to it, this is not a bottom line issue. We're talking about people who feel very firmly about their homeland. And also it resurrects these very strong feelings that all Palestinians have about what they refer to as the Nakba, the expulsion of Palestinians from their homes in Greater Palestine, today Israel. Now we can get into a discussion if you want. I don't think we need to, but that's what this evokes to many of them. And I don't think they're going to accept that. Certainly not the Gazans, but nor the Palestinians who live in the West Bank, nor the many Palestinians who reside in neighboring Jordan.
Right.
And so there will be significant pushback from throughout the Middle East, everywhere from the Arab Street to Arab leaders. And I think we're already getting a sense of that. Statements that have been made by Saudi Arabia, a document that was signed by 5 Arab foreign ministers, including those of Jordan, Egypt, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. The 5th may have been the UAE, steadfastly opposing the removal of Gazans from Gaza. So if Mr. Trump intends to rebuild the Gaza Strip into some Middle East Riviera, where is he going to get the finances for that? Moreover, he's talked about inserting U.S. troops, which is just unfathomable at a time when the United States faces existential threats from some very menacing near-peer powers, particularly China, but also Russia and Iran. So I can't believe that the folks in the Pentagon will be very excited to hear this news and to start thinking about what they're going to do. So just to wrap it up, I will say on political, legal, economic, military, and moral grounds, his position with respect to Gaza is just simply unsupportable, and it's grossly impractical.
The future of national security is here. Introducing the Cipher Brief's NatSec Edge Conference, June 5th through 6th, 2025 in Austin, Texas. Join leaders from intelligence, defense, private industry, and investment as they explore the innovations shaping tomorrow's world. Gain critical insights, connect with top minds, and shape the future of security in an interconnected world. Don't just witness the future, be a part of it. Secure your spot now at natsekedge.com.
Well, let's pick up. You put so much on the table, Ambassador Grappo, on the impractical part of this, because there are already, and you've been very eloquent about it, arguments about the moral and the legal. But to take 2 countries you mentioned, even if it were voluntary, right? Even if you were saying, okay, we're going to help you rebuild, and for the time being, we're going to temporarily, which is not what the president said, house Palestinians from Gaza. As I understand it, the Egyptians and Jordanians, who are the neighboring Arab states that have been mentioned, have even before yesterday said they're not interested in taking in large numbers of Gazans. Let me just stop there. What the president seemed to suggest that American influence and leverage over Egypt and Jordan, of course, longtime U.S. allies, that he could make a difference. I think King Abdullah is coming to Washington in a week or two. What is there anything to that he may have persuading power in this respect?
Well, the one real leverage that he has is that both of those countries receive substantial aid from the United States. In the case of Egypt, $1.3 billion a year. And in the case of Jordan, depending on which year we look at, anywhere between $200 and $400 million a year. And in both cases, these address both security needs of these 2 countries as well as some of their economic needs. Now, on the economic side, I suspect that that may be up to question anyway, given the actions that he's taken with regard to USAID assistance and development programming around the world. But nevertheless, he does have that leverage. Both of these countries are highly dependent on it, in particular Jordan. Mm-hmm. And so if he uses that, he will make this decision for both leaders very, very difficult. On the other hand, there is no question about where the Egyptian people and the Jordanian people stand on this issue. They won't accept it. They simply will not accept it. Something that's not been said and needs to be taken into account is, of course, in the case of Jordan, we already have a country that has this ethnic fault line that runs through the country. Between 70 and 80% of the population of Jordan is already Palestinian, either those who settled there after 1948 or their descendants, and those who left their homes in the West Bank in 1967. Mm-hmm. And so you have a very, very large population, which has always been quite restive and problematic for King Hussein, King Abdullah's father, and now King Abdullah. The last thing he wants to do is to add gasoline to that very difficult ethnic situation that he must constantly be aware of and address.
Right.
I would not be surprised if we see Arabs taking to the street in Jordan in a very short while. And in the case of Egypt, they have their economic challenges too. Jordan probably more so, and compounding that with the presence of large numbers of resettled Palestinians who are going to be looking for work, who are going to be who will need to make claims on resources that Egypt does not have,
Right.
to help get them settled. So neither of these countries is in a position, whether real, political, or economic, to accept these. The last point I'll make is the history of Palestinians in other countries outside of the West Bank or Gaza is not a good one. Just like the examples of Jordan, the Black September movement in the early 1980s, they were transplanted to southern Lebanon in the early 80s, and we saw a civil war erupt, largely because of the presence of Palestinians. And then, of course, the Palestinians who had been present and living peacefully and very successfully and prosperously in Kuwait, who were expelled during Saddam's or after Saddam's invasion of Kuwait in the 1990s. So early 1990s. So there, it's just something that I don't think any Arab leader is going to seriously contemplate.
So can we go now to another critical country here, and another one you know well, Ambassador, and that's Saudi Arabia. The President Trump has, I think, by most accounts, an excellent relationship with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and he, I think, has been very clear about his hopes to not only continue that relationship, but perhaps help broker the Saudi-Israeli rapprochement that was on the table before October 7th, 2023. What this is the Gaza plan, if that's what we want to call it, is also just a kind of non-starter, one would think, for the kingdom. How do we square that Trump-Saudi relationship with this new element in the mix?
I think the president has severely tested that relationship because he's asking the Crown Prince to move in a direction that Mohammed bin Salman knows better than anyone, is opposed by virtually every Saudi in the kingdom, who stand firmly behind the Palestinian people, and at the particular time, the people of Gaza. And I don't, even if he were inclined to do it, I don't think Mohammed bin Salman would cross the Saudi people, absent a truly dramatic shift in the president's position and in the conditions in Gaza, where the ceasefire to endure and take root. I don't think that's likely. And see some changes in the Israeli government. That's not imminent. Then you could foresee some circumstances where maybe the Saudi Crown Prince would backpedal just a little. But at the present moment, he has seemed to double down on his position that there will be no normalization agreement absent a commitment to, not a commitment, an actual Palestinian state. So he's really gone even beyond his previous remarks on what he expects to see with regard to Palestine.
So, Ambassador Grappo, last question on this, and it's, I guess, a bit of a devil's advocate question. The presentation of again, I'm not sure plan is the right word, what President Trump laid out, putting aside the real estate component, did have an element of, these poor, destitute people ravaged by poverty and war and everything else. They've got no homes to go to. And, it's a bit of that sort of, I think it's fair to call it a wrecking ball style that Mr. Trump sometimes has. But in this case, it's a problem that certainly hasn't had a plethora of great solutions in recent years or decades and so forth. Is there any middle ground here? Is there any utility? I assume from your answer you would say no to this kind of, out of the box doesn't begin to say it, right? Approach to something just to kind of scramble the eggs and see what kind of an omelet you can come up with. I'm out of metaphors here, but is there anything to say in a positive way about taking that approach and abandoning the traditional, let's say, with the Gaza Strip?
I think we have to be honest with ourselves, and I would apply this certainly to myself and any other person who claims some knowledge and understanding of this part of the world, that a long-range planning often does not go well in the Middle East. It's just a very restive part of the world and a difficult part of the world. But the president's remarks, his ideas for how he sees this issue being resolved, I think we have to treat them seriously. And what convinced me that he was serious, I was somewhat dismissive of them earlier because they seemed to be off script. But he was not speaking off script. He was reading a statement in his comments yesterday, which leads me to believe that there was some discussion among his staff on what he would say and how he would say it. I will say that Bibi Netanyahu, standing next to him, appeared uncharacteristically submissive, almost to the point of shock at what he was hearing. And he didn't want to contradict the president.
Right.
The president is one person I think he actually fears, and that's not something you can say often about Mr. Netanyahu. And so he tried to do offer a roundabout compliments on the president's ideas. But if his plan is to throw the chess pieces up in the air and see where they land, he will find himself checkmated, and we will find ourselves, the United States, checkmated. This is a conflict that's been going on arguably for over 100 years, since the end of World War I, and without resolution. And the notion that somehow the United States, by coming in as a real estate developer and a peacemaker with our troops in an already raging conflict, is fanciful. It's fantastical. And particularly when considered in light of all the other challenges we face in the world. The Russians and the Chinese have to be ecstatic over this, just ecstatic, gleeful, that the president seems to be willingly walking into a clear trap from which I can't imagine an exit. So no, if he wants a wrecking ball, the wrecking ball swings both ways, and have to be careful about that. And it will serve as a rallying cry. This is the best shot in the arm that organizations like Hamas, as well as Hezbollah up in Lebanon and the others throughout the region, need after the devastating losses that they've suffered over the course of the last 6-9 months, however you want to calculate it. It will boost recruitment, and it doesn't portend well in terms of this ceasefire, whose odds were pretty limited to begin with.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Ambassador Gary Grappo, thank you as always for being with us. Appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Happy to do it.